back.
Alright, so I need to create an eave now on these end trusses. Traditionally, you would just put a purlin on top here and just extend it, and that's easy. But with it in the middle, I'm going to have to cut a purlin and weld it in here to create that eave overhang of about, I'm not sure yet, probably 500 or 600 millimeters.
So I decided on 500 millimeters and cut them to suit, and then I just welded them into place, and they turned out pretty good. And I just made sure they were obviously square to the top edge of that I-beam.
Right, finally we're all done, and today I'm going to start assembling. So here's the purlin extensions on the end truss. I've done the same on both ends now, and if I got my measurements right and welded this properly, this should go up pretty squarely and easily, and then I'll start figuring out a plan to lift the trusses up, get the purlins on, and then start doing the roof.
So we start lifting the columns in first, and one of the things that has made this job easier was the pre-work when I did the piers. So all of those piers were laser leveled, and it made assembling the plates on there and then ultimately tacking the columns in place much easier. And just now I'm really just bolting them back on, and I don't know why it was such a surprise, but when I checked everything, it is just perfectly square and diagonal. Incredible really. So this is certainly one very accurate workshop. Now I tension these bolts up to 80 Newton meters. It's the chemical anchors, the Hilti Ultimate Strength, and a bit later in the next video I'll show you a bit more about the concrete. So these will end up underneath the concrete, so I do need to make sure they're tensioned because they won't be accessible in the future. So here's a look at all the columns, and you can just see they've lined up perfectly, so I'm really happy with how that's turned out. Now I bought this scissor lift about a year ago, and this is a huge job, and just for safety's sake I thought it would be worthwhile having a scissor lift because there's so many beams and things to lift, and I obviously want to be as safe as possible. Now cutting the girts was just easy to do it with the cut-off wheel, and I progressively go around. My mag drill come in really handy again. Now all of the holes I drill have only 1mm clearance, so they're quite tight fit, but you know, given the accuracy, they all went together and everything's square, so it did make things a bit easier to assemble. So first things go up on the scissor lift. We use this over and over, as you can imagine. Now this scissor lift is overkill for this job. The peak of the truss is going to be about 5.5 meters, and this scissor lift can lift 11. Now I'm not a fan of scissor lifts to start with, so I bought an oversized one thinking that I'm happy if I only have to use half of its capacity, because going up 11 meters seems absolutely bonkers, and I probably wouldn't be prepared to do that. Putting a few more girts in here. Now these are close together, but the reason for that is there's a little piece of wall section on the lean-to side, and you'll see that in later videos. These are the first two trusses up. Now I actually did lift those with the scissor lift because they were the lighter weight ones, and when I say lightweight, they were still reasonably heavy, but under the capacity of what I could lift. And what I decided to do is, there is a double plate there. I lifted it onto the plate and then welded it in position, and that way I knew it was going to be exactly positioned the way I wanted.
Can't complain about that. These are 3x360 lasers. They are something else. You get a perfect cross line. And again, near the birds, but yeah, that's Looking amazing.
So at this stage, I'd put the lean-to rafters on. The first two trusses are up and the purlins are up on that first section, and now it's time to start lifting these heavier trusses. Now before I lift those, I'm drilling this set of holes here in 3 of the trusses, and the reason for this is I'm going to put a lifting beam in, and it's just easier to drill these while they're on the ground. And they're 16mm bolts, 4 in each truss, and what that's going to do is hold up an I-beam where I'm going to have a rolling chain block to lift engines out, and it's going to span over about 8 meters.
Right, so we've got the first 2 trusses up and all of the columns. Those first 2 trusses are a bit lighter weight, and the next 4 are quite heavy duty. And look, it's just too heavy and too dangerous with the scissor lift. So I've hired this machine here. The truss weighs about 400 kilos. This hoist can lift 800 kilos at 8 meters. So I've only got to go half of the weight, but up to about 5.5 meters. So it all looks pretty solid. I'll put the scissor lift up against it just as extra safety. The excavator can lift it on, and fingers crossed this goes well and this bit will finally be done.
So I wasn't sure what to expect with this lifting device, and you can see once it's set up there's counterweights at the back there, about 250 kilos worth. It winds up nice and slow, so it's controllable. I don't need to lift it to its max of 8 meters, which is a good thing. You can see here, the first one especially, just have the scissor lift there as a bit of a backup, because at the end of the day, that truss there weighs about 400 kilos, and it is a lot of weight, and it doesn't feel right to have it so far in the air just without any support. So this first one with this high machine goes up, we wiggle it into position over the double plates again, and then once it's up there, maneuver it around just a few millimeters here or there, get it exactly where I want, and then I tack weld it into position before finally welding it on. Now you could have welded those on the ground. I don't know, I'm happy with doing it this way. I just think it's saves for any error and messing about when bolt holes don't quite line up. Now I have pretty good access up there with the scissor lift, so welding in position was no big deal. Now at this stage I've got 2 more to go, and I just repeat the process, and you can see it here. It actually winds up and down with a battery powered drill, and it winds up with the drill and you just reverse it to come back down. There is a hand lever on these as well, so when you get it really close you can winch it over by hand, and here you can just see we're pushing it into position at the bottom, and you can't normally do this obviously, but I get up on the scissor lift and pull the top, which felt a lot more controllable. So I'll get that into position, weld it up, and we're getting very close to having these trusses up.
It's not bloody artwork.
This is welding the final truss, and then I start lifting up the purlins. Now such a massive job, and to think this whole thing so far I've done myself and my wife, so without her help this wouldn't have been possible. So I think we've achieved a great deal, and this is looking really good so far. And once those purlins are up, they're quite heavy as well. They're 200 C-sections, and they're about 5 meters long, so they're not the lightest thing to maneuver around. And again, with the scissor lift, that made putting them up there so much easier. I don't know how you'd actually do that without a scissor lift, or you'd have to have some sort of scaffold, which would just be a pain moving around all the time. So there you can see we've got a bit more of it up. This is the last wide bay, putting the purlins up, and then all that's left is that little skinny bit in the middle here, and I left that to last because it was a bit more enjoyable and easier to manage just with those shorter pieces that were around 2 meters long. So now the frame's up. I still need to do the bracing, I still need to do a bit of tidy up for things like the eaves, but it's coming up really nice. Now the weather is changing in Australia. You can feel the cold coming and there's some rain, and I now need to start focusing on getting the slab done. I'm hoping to get this done soon. If I miss the boat and the weather changes, I will probably be wetted in until summer, which is something I really want to avoid. So here's a quick look. Next video, hopefully I start prepping for the slab, and after that it'll be time to put the roof on. See you soon.